Today we are going to make a quick and easy pumpkin pecan bread. You're going to love how wonderfully delicious this is. Preheat your oven to 350 degrees Fahrenheit or 180 degrees Celsius. You're going to need a loaf pan 9 by 5 by about 3 inches tall if you're going to make one, or you can make two if you like, and you're going to just bake it a little less. I recommend making two if you want to share this, but if you want a really tall loaf, go ahead and make one. In the bottom, I like to line it with a scrap piece of parchment paper just to ensure that it will come out. If it's not nonstick, you want to go ahead and grease and flour the pan. Set that aside, and then we're going to move on to our pecans. You want to break these into various sizes. I like to use my hands as opposed to a chopper or the blender because I like to have variation. Then use a little bit of the flour. We're going to be using about a tablespoon's worth, and then toss your nuts with them. That just helps suspend the nuts in the batter. Now that doesn't work for all batters, it only works for really thick batters. So if this was a thin batter, I wouldn't even bother with that step. Set it aside, and then we're going to put in the rest of our ingredients. We're going to need some spices and some leavening. We need some baking powder. We need some salt. If you want to use self-rising flour, you would skip these things. Then we're going to use some allspice, some ginger, and some cinnamon. This is going to be a really pleasantly tasting dough. Pumpkin itself doesn't have a strong flavor, so you really rely on the flavor of your spices that you use. Now, if you don't have allspice, you can use nutmeg or cloves in its place, or you can use pumpkin pie spice for all the spices in equal amounts. We're going to add this into some flour, and then we're going to whisk or stir it together until it's nicely incorporated. We're going to move on to another bowl, and we're going to beat 4 eggs. And after we get that done, we're going to add in some oil. You can use any type of oil you like. You can use olive oil, canola oil, you can use coconut oil, you can even use melted butter. Just make sure that it equals the same amount when it's melted. You want to mix it until it looks really thin like this, and then we're going to just add in our sugar, and we're going to stir it until it just starts to dissolve. And you can use white sugar or brown sugar, or a combination of both. I'm using just a little bit of brown sugar because quite honestly I ran out of white sugar, but I do think that the brown sugar gives a really nice pleasant taste to pumpkin bread, so I'll leave it up to you. Also, you can cut down the sugar about half a cup, which is what I often do, but I like things with a lot less sugar than most people, so I'm going to put it in how most people prefer this bread. And once you get it dissolved and it looks like this, we're going to put in some canned pumpkin. Now you could go all fancy and make your own pumpkin puree. More power to you. If you do it that way, it's about 2 cups worth, and it is absolutely not worth my time. I've tried it in the past, and it's a big mess, and I don't really think it gives that much of a flavor difference. Some people swear it does. I'll leave that up to you. You're going to mix this until it's nice and smooth. And once that is ready, you're going to put in your flour mixture from earlier. At this point, I like to switch over from my whisk to a spatula because if I used the whisk, it would just clog up and I would have a lot of problems. You want to moisten this until it's just combined, and then you're going to fold in your nuts. Now, if you don't like pecans, you can completely leave them out. You could replace them with walnuts. Walnuts and pumpkin go really well. Or you could even put in some fruit, or you could put some fruit and nuts together. This is a great recipe to share and make 2 loaves. I'm making just one giant loaf because I'm giving this away. But if I wanted to keep one, I could keep one and give one away, or keep one and freeze one. They freeze beautifully up to about 6 months if you wrap them well. And you can cut it ahead of time, or you could just leave it whole. And you can also use this with ice cream. It tastes really good with vanilla ice cream. You just fold in the nuts at the end, and this is a really stiff batter, so don't worry if you struggle a bit. And then once that's all incorporated, we're going to put it into our baking pan. Now, if you're making one loaf, please make sure your loaf pan is 3 inches tall and not shorter. Some of these pans will tell you they're 3 inches tall, and they're actually only like 2.5. You will make a mess in the oven if you do that. Look how thick this batter is. So once again, you want to make sure that your pan is a non-stick pan, and if not, you want to grease and flour it or spray it with one of those non-stick baking sprays. I always like to put parchment paper in the bottom for added assurance. Try to level it off the best you can. If you don't, it's not a big deal because there's going to be a crack and a dome in this bread, and it's not going to be the end of the world if it's a little bit off skew because nobody's going to notice. However, if you do have batter on the sides, I do recommend go ahead, take a damp rag and wipe that off. You want to do this because you don't want burned bits to fall into your batter as it's baking. Plus, it just makes the house smell awful when those little tiny pieces of dough get overbaked on your pan, and it's harder to clean up your pan at the end. Now, since this is so tall, if you want some added assurance this isn't going to spill it into your oven, you can get a small baking tray and set underneath it. This does two things. It would catch any excess batter, and also it helps distribute the heat a little bit better, so you're not going to get your bread to over brown while it's baking. This is going to take a whopping 80 to 90 minutes to cook, maybe even 100 minutes, and it's well worth the effort. It's going to look very golden brown. It's going to have a cracked appearance, and it's going to slightly separate from the pan when it's ready. You want to leave this for about 10 minutes before you remove it from your pan. If you flip it over and you're having difficulty removing it, get a plastic spatula like this and just kind of wedge it in between the bread and the pan carefully. This will help you from one, scratching up your pan, and it will help release that bread from your pan. This is why I say to use parchment paper even in a nonstick pan, because sometimes nonstick pans fail remarkably a lot. So now it came out easily, and we have this beautifully pumpkin loaf bread that we can share with others. Let's cut it into this so we can see what it looks like. Our house smells so good right now. I encourage you to make this loaf. Even if you don't eat it, make it and give it away to someone because your house will just smell amazing. And look at all those pecans. That's why we use 2 full cups of pecans. Again, if you don't like nuts, you can leave them out entirely. But if you do, you're going to really appreciate this bread. I hope you enjoyed this recipe. Here are your ingredients if you want to follow along. Thank you for visiting us at jacksonsjob.com. And as always, happy baking.